fractions. So let's see how we do that when we have an actual problem. If we have 5/6 and we're subtracting from it 1/3, the first thing we do is check, do we have a common denominator between these fractions? And we don't. We have a 6 up here and we have a 3 here. So just like for adding fractions, we need to change one or both of these fractions so that we get a common denominator. Now since I know that 3 times 2 is 6, I can get a common denominator of 6 here, which will match this one. The way I do it is I say 1/3, and what I'll do is I'm basically going to multiply the bottom by 2 and the top by 2. And what that's going to do, on the top, 1 times 2 is 2. On the bottom, we get 6. This one we don't have to change at all. We still have 5/6. And now we can subtract them because we have a common denominator. And so what we do is we just keep the 6 on the bottom, because that's what we do when we have a common denominator. In the top, we subtract 5 minus 2, which gives us 3. So that's the answer, 3/6. But also, we always check after we do anything with fractions, can we simplify it? And we see right away that we can divide the top by 3 and the bottom by 3. We can do that as long as we do it to top and bottom. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 6 divided by 3 is 2. So the answer to this problem is 1/2. That's fully simplified. Now also it makes sense because 1/2 of a pizza is the same as 3 out of 6 pieces of a pizza. So that makes us feel good that we've done the simplification correctly. All right, let's go ahead and do another one. Let's say we have 1/2 and we're subtracting from it 3/8. Right? So again, we check the denominators. We have a 2 and we have an 8. So that's not going to really work. But we see right away that 2 times 4 is 8. So I can transform this fraction to have a common denominator by basically taking the fraction 1/2 and I'll multiply the bottom by 4 and the top by 4. The reason I'm multiplying by 4 is because then I'll have 4/8. Now I have an 8 to match this one. Here we have the 3/8 that I don't have to change at all. And basically now I have two fractions that I can subtract. It's the same exact process that we use for adding. You're not really having to learn anything new here. But here we can see that since we have a common denominator of 8, it just comes along for the ride. And then we take 4 minus 3 for the numerators, which gives us 1/8. Now we check and see if it's fully simplified, and it is. I can't really subtract or divide top and bottom or anything to make that simpler. So 1/8 is the final answer for that subtraction. All right. Now what if we have 7/12 and I'm subtracting from that 1/4? Like this. So I have a 12 up here and I have a 4 down there. Those are clearly not, common denominator, but I know that 4 times 3 is 12. So I can just transform this fraction by taking the 1/4 and I can multiply the top and bottom by 3 because I'm trying to reach 12. All right, and so what I will have is on the top I will have 3 and on the bottom I will have 12. This fraction I don't have to change at all, 7/12. And I remind myself I'm subtracting, so I'm subtracting 7/12 minus 3/12. Since the denominators are the same, I just keep it along for the ride, and then the numerator, 7 minus 3 is 4. So the answer is 4/12, but I always have to check, is this fully simplified? And then I see right away that I can divide the top by 4 and the bottom also by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 12 divided by 4 is 3. So the answer is 1/3. Now again, 1/3 represents exactly the same amount of stuff as 4/12. So this is the answer also. This just looks a little bit simpler, which is always what we try to do when we solve fraction problems. We always want to basically make them as simple as we can. All right. A couple additional problems. What if we have 3/4 minus 1/2? 3/4 minus 1/2. So what do we have here? We have a 4 and we have a 2. All right, now we want to have a common denominator. So we see right away that 2 times 2 is 4. So I can multiply this fraction by 2. So basically I can have 1/2, and then I can multiply the top and bottom by 2. Why am I multiplying by 2? Because I'm trying to get a 4 down on the bottom, which will match that. So what I will then have on the top will be 2. 1 times 2 is 2. On the bottom I will have 4. This fraction I don't have to change at all. Just keep it as 3/4. And I'm subtracting these. And now I have two fractions with a 4 on the bottom. Since I have a common denominator of 4, I just keep that on the bottom. All right? And then in the top I take 3 minus 2, which is 1. And then I check, can I simplify this fraction any further? And I actually cannot, so I'm going to circle that and basically say that 1/4 is the final answer. All right, let's do the last problem here. What if we have 9/10 and we're subtracting from that 2/5? All right, so I'm checking for a common denominator. I have a 10 and I have a 5. Clearly they're not the same, so I can't really do anything immediately, but I noticed that 5 times 2 is 10, so I can transform this to have the same denominator. So if I have 2/5, and I want to do that, I'll multiply the bottom by 2 and the top by 2. The reason I'm doing that is to make 10 on the bottom, and so over here I'll have 4/10, because 2 times 2 is 4, 5 times 2 is 10. This one, I don't have to do anything to, I'll just keep it as 9/10, and I'll remind myself that I'm subtracting here. So when I look at this now, I have two fractions, both that have a 10 on the bottom. Now I'm okay to subtract. So in the final answer, 10 stays in the answer. And then up here, 9 minus 4 should give me 5. So I have 5/10. So I could circle that, but I always want to check, do I have it fully simplified? And I realize that I can divide the top by 5 and the bottom by 5, simplifying this fraction down to 5 divided by 5 is 1, 10 divided by 5 is 2. Makes total sense. 1/2 of a pizza is the same as 5/10, or 5 out of 10 pieces of a different pizza. Same amount. So the answer I get is 1/2 here. So you're starting to get pretty proficient at subtracting fractions. And I hope now that by this time you can see that the process really is the same as adding fractions. We started with the simpler subtraction problems when we already had a common denominator, and then we did some problems where we had to simplify the answer. Now we're doing problems where we're having to find our own common denominator, but in all of these problems we only have to multiply or transform one of those fractions. In the next section, we'll be doing the same stuff, subtracting fractions. We'll have to find our own common denominator. We'll have to manipulate both fractions, just like we did for addition. Same exact process. So follow me on there. Make sure you understand these problems. Do the worksheets. Follow me on to the next lesson where we'll continue subtracting fractions. We have to find our own common denominator.